This week on Crash Course, we'll be talking about the shifts to the presidency that occurred
because of Nixon.
When President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, took office. Johnson was re-elected in 1964, but he did not run very far in the 1968 election.
In the 1968 election, there was a competition for the Democratic nomination between Senator McCarthy from Minnesota, Robert Kennedy, as well as Hubert Humphrey. McCarthy, a candidate promoting idealism, primarily gained support from young voters and college students, and was only a few thousand votes short of beating LBJ in the first primaries before Johnson dropped out. After seeing this interest in new campaigners, Robert Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey decided to join the race.
Unfortunately, Robert Kennedy was assassinated by Saran on June 6, 1968 in Los Angeles. The race was left to McCarthy and Humphrey.
The Democratic National Convention on August 26, 1968 was controversial. The National Convention was following a year of violence, and it became a platform for further violence.
Humphrey had decided to call on his friends within the party because he wasn't necessarily popular with the public to secure the nomination. This was because he was the only candidate who was not anti-war. Humphrey did not even enter a single primary.
Lee had intended for the convention to be a showcase of Chicago. The convention was reduced to violent rioting and brutality from the police and Illinois National Guard. Many protesters, as well as innocent bystanders, had to be rushed to seek medical care after being attacked with tear gas and physical violence.
So the election of 1968 ended up between Hubert Humphrey as the Democratic nominee and Richard Nixon as the Republican. George Wallace, the racist governor of Alabama, also ran on the American Independent ticket and was the most successful third-party candidate ever. Nixon had climbed his way back up the political ladder after seemingly being reduced to irrelevance after the 1960 election, but this time he campaigned harder than ever.
Nixon decided to develop his Southern strategy, which was supposed to appeal to white Southerners who usually voted Democrat. He did this by appealing to the regional racial tensions of the time and capitalized on the Democratic Party platform being pro-civil rights.
This way we see the electoral map today.
As you can see from the 1968 electoral map, Nixon began sweeping parts of the South, taking states like Florida, Virginia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. He also ran his election on promising to end the Vietnam War, which was popular to many Americans.
In the end, however, it was an extremely close election, with Nixon taking 42.42% of the popular vote to Humphrey's 42.72. This number made Nixon extremely nervous, and in many ways, he obsessed over winning a landslide victory in 1972.
As a result of the narrow 1968 race, Nixon's presidency was characterized with a feeling of nervousness and resolve to do whatever it would take to win the re-election in 1972.
This desperation went as far as to cover up the White House involvement in the break-in at the site of the 1972 Democratic National Convention.
On June 17, 1972, there was a break-in at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C., where 5 men were caught with possession of audio and video surveillance equipment while checking previously installed bugs in the hotel.
Leader of the break-in, Gary McCord, was an employee for CREEP, which should technically be CREP, but I guess whatever works. CREEP, also known as the Committee to Re-elect the President, was run by Attorney General John Mitchell, and as seen in its very ominous name, had a sketchy or more illegal feeling to it. Men such as Gordon Liddy and Howard Hunt, who both worked for CREEP, were utilized in order to discredit and humiliate the president's enemies or opposition.
The sudden increase in desire for the protection of the president's image can be traced back to the leaking of the Pentagon Papers.
These were a classified report of the actual events that took place in Vietnam, which was secretly released to the public by Daniel Ellsberg, who disagreed with the actions being taken by the U.S. in Vietnam. The release of the accurate timeline enraged citizens who had been blinded from the truth of the course of the war.
When the public were informed about the Watergate scandal, they didn't react very differently. There was a crisis of confidence and fear that came with the idea of someone breaking into and keeping illegal tabs on the government. In the beginning, Nixon's men kept his name out of the papers and detached him from the scandal, but as time went on, someone was bound to break the silence. That someone was James McCord, who asked for leniency in his sentencing due to the promise of a future pardon from Nixon himself, if he were to keep quiet about the information he knew.
This confession led to the beginning of an investigation by the Senate into the Nixon presidency and his involvement in the breach of security and crime committed in the Watergate Hotel. After being another of the many victims of the scandal, Dean revealed Nixon's involvement in the cover-up, but the indictment was secured because of audio recordings from the Oval Office. Initially, Nixon tried to declare executive privilege and keep the tape, but a Supreme Court decision ruled that the tapes had to be given to the prosecutor.
He's held clips of conversations that directly linked Nixon to the scandal and cover-up, and put actions to impeach the president in motion. Though Nixon may not have known about the break-in and attempted robbery when it happened, he took considerable measures in order to bury the evidence that it was tied in any way to the White House or his presidency.
Because of this, Nixon was guilty and decided to become the first president to ever resign, rather than the first to be impeached, given that Johnson's impeachment did not pass by one vote.
Now it's time for the mystery document. If Jackie guesses it right, we have a surprise video clip that we're going to show. And if Jackie guesses it wrong, then we're looking up the 5 hardest would you rathers and she has to answer all of them live. Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions have been made that shape the history of this nation. Each time I have done so to discuss with you some matter that I believe affected the national interest. In all the decisions I have made in my public life, I have always tried to do what was best for the nation. Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to preserve, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me. In the past few days, however, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. Is it Nixon's resignation speech?
Watergate had created a deep sense of distrust in the American people about the executive office. Over the past few decades, the presidency had greatly expanded in power, starting with Roosevelt's actions in the Great Depression.
This expansion of power culminated in Johnson's Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which basically allowed for the president to declare war without Congress, and Congress actually handed over this constitutional power.
Because of Watergate, however, the American people now wanted the executive office checked and wanted Congress to play a greater role in American politics. This was evident in the passing of the War Powers Act in 1973, which stated that the president had to consult Congress before sending troops overseas to fight in battles.
The American people hated the idea of politicians out for themselves, just like Nixon was. Instead, they wanted more open and candid politics, like the kind of presidency Ford vowed to conduct.
Nixon's scandalous resignation also led to multiple state election reform laws, once again because people were desiring a more open version of politics.
These election reform laws led to the formation of the FEC, or Federal Election Commission, in 1975 by Congress. The FEC now regulates all campaign spending and how much money a candidate can accept from a donor. People are now forced to disclose how much money they are giving to candidates.
Nixon greatly changed the presidency of the United States in many ways. He not only changed the geographical political alignments, but also weakened the power of the executive office. This led to new controls on the office and a new sense of power given to Congress.
In Ford's first months in office, he continued to prolong the uncertainty that began to cloud the presidency.
On September 8, 1974, Ford granted Nixon a full pardon for all his crimes, which outraged the public and started his presidency off on a rather sour note. He gave pardon to the mastermind of the program, but let all the other men pay time for their involvement, which seemed unfair and corrupt.
Then, soon after his first questionable action, Ford dropped another bomb on the American public by blurting out to the press that the CIA had been involved in assassination attempts to try to kill foreign leaders.
After investigation, it was revealed that the CIA had led 8 different missions to try to kill Fidel Castro, among other foreign leaders. House and Senate committees were ordered to investigate the agency further, and Ford, in an attempt to fix his mistake, issued an executive order in 1975 that assassinations cannot be used as a tool in foreign policy.
Restart. The American discontent with Ford's presidency was very prevalent in 1976 election, and Jimmy Carter and his campaign chose not to commit himself to either the Republican or the Democratic Party, but rather chose to campaign as a third-party candidate.
His resistance to side with either sets of morals that had grown to become increasingly unpopular gave him a major advantage in the primaries and the election.
Nixon greatly changed the powers of the executive office.
And the American people started to view the president in a very different light.